I can't believe you just did that!
My name is Maya Henderson. I'm 28, and for the last 2 years I've lived with one foot in a world that doesn't exist until I draw it into being. People say I make comics, as if that were a hobby you fold between laundry loads. What I do is write, direct, cast, and edit without a crew. I design costumes and architectures, choreograph motion inside rectangles, and time revelation to a page turn you can feel in your chest. My work has been fortunate, starred reviews for my breakout title, Shadowlands Rising, an Eisner on the shelf that still surprises me when sunlight hits it, and a living made of book sales, licensing, merchandise, and talks. Some years I earn $185,000. On launch years, more. I don't lead with that number to impress anyone. I tell you because the number becomes a character in this story. Some people understand worth only when it can be added, not when it must be respected. The project that carried me through the last 2 years is a trilogy called The Meridian Cycle. 3 volumes, more than 800 illustrated pages, 47 major and supporting characters, whose anatomy and color logic must hold from the smallest panel to the largest splash, and 5 distinct cultures with languages of cloth and stone. You don't keep a world like that in your head so much as wire it into your nervous system. It lived, mostly, inside the brushed aluminum shell of my laptop. Script drafts, thumbnails, layered PSDs with so many masks they felt like sedimentary rock, color script charts, continuity notes. If the laptop was a machine, to me it was a vault. On the Saturday, everything changed. My parents hosted their annual summer party. Chlorine in the air. Potato salad in tubs that looked like they could survive the apocalypse. A chorus of uncles with opinions and cousins with updates, and the warm hum of a family that has rehearsed its roles so long no one notices the stage lights. I brought my laptop because I planned to leave early and finish a run of layouts due to my editor. I set it on a small table near the deep end, beside my towel and a sweating glass of water. My father, Kenneth, 60, with the optimism of a salesman and the memory of a gambler, had spent 3 weeks pressuring me to invest in his new Guaranteed Success franchise, a specialty coffee kiosk that required $139 to launch. His pitch came with a spreadsheet where every arrow pointed up, and reality had been amortized out of sight. No franchise fees that bite into margins, no maintenance losses, no staff turnover, no competition that serves the same product on every corner. He has failed at a restaurant, misbid a landscaping company into bankruptcy, bought and flipped used cars that died on the way to the lot, and stacked 2 multi-level marketing pyramids so carefully they still collapsed. In his script, those weren't failures, they were lessons. My mother, Janice, 57, administrative coordinator by day, peacekeeper by habit, has carried the cost of those lessons with her paycheck and her stories. To relatives, she says, I do art projects, breezy like a weather report. That afternoon, he made the party his stage. He found me by the pool and tuned his voice to public address, the setting where the words are less important than the audience. Maya, he said, smiling for the cousins who had drifted closer, about that franchise. You need to reconsider. Minimal work. passive income. Guaranteed. Conversations thinned. Ice tapped glass. I kept my voice even. No, I'm not giving you $139,000. The smile stayed. His eyes didn't. You make plenty from those art books. This is nothing to you. It's life-changing for me. Family helps family. Here is what I didn't say, that I had already been paying their mortgage for 18 months, $2,400 every cycle, along with their car insurance, internet and cable, the family phone plan, and a raft of subscriptions they never once thanked me for. That 5 years earlier, I had loaned him $35,000 for a pressure washing business that evaporated into support the way a debt becomes smoke when the debtor is family. That my work, what he calls drawing pictures, takes 8 to 12 hours per page and thousands of hours per book. None of those facts matter to someone who treats a boundary like an insult. So I said the only truth that mattered. You have lost money on every venture. This will be the same. I won't fund it. Something small moved in his face, the muscle that twitches when persuasion turns to punishment. His gaze slid to the table. 3 steps, 1 reach. He lifted the laptop with one hand, palm open as if he were showing me a card he planned to vanish. Then gravity did what gravity does. The machine flashed once in the sun and slipped into the deep end, dropping 8 feet without even the courtesy of a dramatic splash. "Oh," he said. "Oops. I accidentally dropped your laptop." The smirk did the punctuation. Just an accident. My mother arrived as if she'd been cued. "It's just an accident, Maya. These things happen. You should back things up better." There is a form of silence that roars. 15 relatives stood within the radius of truth. None spoke it. No one said, "Adults do not accidentally pick up and drop the thing that contains 2 years of their daughter's work." Social psychology calls it the bystander effect. When you look around to see what to do, and all you see are people looking around. In families, the effect wears 2 costumes. Respect your elders and don't make a scene. I didn't scream. I didn't dive. I didn't lecture anyone about the irretrievability of the tiny, iterative decisions that make a page feel alive. Decisions you cannot recreate the same way once the layers are gone. I watched my father's mouth hitch into satisfaction. I watched my mother fold herself, as always, into his version of events. And I did the only powerful thing available when words won't purchase understanding. I took inventory. Here is the part you need to know. I keep redundant cloud backups. The vault was never at the bottom of that pool. It lived across a continent, dry and humming, where nothing my father could throw would reach it. What sank wasn't my work. It was my last illusion about safety, the fantasy that I could keep funding their comfort while they mocked the labor that created it. So I stayed another hour. I tasted nothing, but I counted. The mortgage draft scheduled in 5 days. The $320 car insurance premium. The $215 internet and cable. The $160 phones. The streaming accounts that turned their evenings into noise. The unspoken credit card I had kept current to spare them late-night panic. I counted, and somewhere between a forkful of potato salad and a polite nod to an aunt, I realized my hands were steady, Rage is a bonfire. Clarity is ice. At dusk, I folded my towel, took my keys, said goodbye to no one. Passing the pool, I saw a rectangle of sky where the laptop had vanished. In the driveway, cousins laughed in the window's reflection. Every family has a price for keeping its story intact. Theirs was my silence. I was about to change the budget. The highway home turned blue and honest. Words like accident and overreacting sounded brittle in my head, like props someone forgot to dust. I unlocked my apartment and opened my other laptop. I checked the backups, files, layers, notes, every soldier accounted for, waiting. Relief settled over me in the precise shape of resolve. At midnight, I would begin. Not out of pettiness, though the petty will think so. I would begin because a boundary without consequence is a rumor. Because the work they belittled has been underwriting their lives. Because if you destroy the thing that feeds you and call it an accident, the only moral response is to name it correctly and act accordingly. The button I planned to press would be small. The cascade it would release would not be. The thing about drawing for a living is that most people only see the final frame, the clean line, the saturated color, the way a character's eyes find you and hold. They don't see the drafts beneath the draft, the ghost lines you learn to bury, the masks that hide 100 corrections, or the calculus of a page where silence does half the talking. I measure my work in hours that don't look like work to people who have never watched time liquefy into choices. 8 to 12 hours per finished page is the average. That's the neat number I give in interviews. What it leaves out is how hours behave when they're braided together. Script to thumbnail, thumbnail to roughs, roughs to inks, inks to flats, flats to palette refinement, palette to lighting logic, lighting to lettering, lettering back to pacing because a word balloon is a form of breath. The number leaves out how often I redraw a hand until it looks like it knows it belongs to the person I'm writing. My first book, Shadowlands Rising, happened the way first books sometimes do. I worked in the edges of other jobs until the edges became the canvas. Back then, my apartment had thin walls and a radiator that sang like tired metal. I drew under a lamp that made everything look a fraction too yellow. My wrists pinned in cheap ace bandages because they ached and I didn't have insurance worth mentioning. The world I built in that book was a place where magic was failing and technology was a rumor that meant both salvation and ruin. People like to talk about the metaphors later. Power, transition, what you hold on to when it stops holding back. And I nodded because, yes, of course, art is a mirror, but also because metaphors are the only way to make life look organized after the fact. What I actually remember is the moment a reviewer used the word luminous in a sentence with my name, the way I put the magazine down and walked around the block, and how my hands shook for no good reason other than relief. 75,000 copies in the first year, which is an iceberg of a number because only the tip is visible to people who didn't watch the glacier forming. An Eisner. 12 languages. A soft seat on panels where they ask you what you think about the future of the medium, and you smile because the medium is the future of you. All of that would be tidy if it sat in a vacuum. It didn't. It sat at a kitchen table with a father who liked to remind me that anyone can draw and a mother who called what I do art projects, like I was 10 and sticky with glitter. My father, Kenneth, has chased money across so many fields he's worn a ring around the horizon. A restaurant that folded because he picked a location no one picked on purpose, and then refused to change the menu because taste, to him, is a referendum on ego. A landscaping company that underbid jobs into a hole he couldn't climb out of. A used car lot with too many cars that had secrets under their hoods. 2 multi-level marketing schemes so efficient at vaporizing savings that if thermodynamics had feelings, they would have blushed. Each failure explained away by weather, suppliers, city inspectors, jealous competitors, and the ancient curse of nobody supports my dream. 5 years ago, after Shadowlands Rising hit big, he came to me with a pressure washing venture that needed $35,000 for equipment and inventory. He was almost gentle that day, a tone he reserves for new ask money. He had charts and estimates and a way of emphasizing recurring income like he'd discovered the moon and brought it to me in a lunchbox. I caved. I called it a loan. I wrote an email that said the word repayment 3 times, because I believed that if language were clear, reality would be, too. 18 months later, the company drowned in its own invoices, and the loan became support, the way water becomes steam if you name it enough times. Every time I asked about it, he smiled an old man smile and said, "Family doesn't keep score." What he meant was I wasn't allowed to use the scoreboard anymore. That's how the quiet ledger began. It advanced 1 line at a time until the page was full. First the car insurance, $320 a month, because they were late and the notice scared my mother. Then the internet and cable, $215, because my father said he needed reliable connectivity for research and my mother liked her shows. Then the cell phones, $160, because it made family communication easier, which meant I paid to receive texts that made me want to disappear. Then streaming, another $85 or so, parceled across platforms because entertainment was cheaper than a reckoning. The largest line arrived 18 months before the pool, their mortgage, $2,400 every month. The number that cut a canyon into my budget and kept their roof where they wanted it. Added up, and it's roughly $3,300 a month, just under $40,000 a year, funneled from what my father calls drawing pictures into the structure that shelters his confidence. Zatatai, you should know I don't resent helping people I love. I resent the lie that it isn't help. I resent the way my mother's eyes travel over my Eisner like it's a paperweight. I resent that the only time my father says the word work with respect is when he's talking about work I'm doing for him. I resent a culture that translates art into luxury until the artist becomes housing. Some people will ask why I didn't say no sooner. That's a fair question until you live inside the logic of a family built on obligation disguised as gratitude. There is a script I grew up reciting. He provided for you when you were small. The voice says, so you owe him forever. The voice never pauses to note that what parents do for their children isn't an investment with dividends. It's the baseline of decency. The voice never notices that when parents take adult children's money to cover basics while sneering at how the money is made. Decency is being repossessed in installments. When I did try to defend my work aloud, when I explained that 3,000 to 5,000 hours go into a single book, that my income comes from careful contracts and is braided with self-employment taxes, agent commissions, and costs that people with bi-weekly paychecks never calculate, my father called it overcomplicating, and my mother called it negative. In their economy, reality is bad manners when it interrupts desire. And then there was the franchise. Specialty coffee kiosk. $139,000 to join the club. He sent me PDFs with pictures of cheerful counters and a bullet list that, if true, would have broken the laws of margin and labor. No mention of franchise royalties that siphon profit before you know you've made any. No math for repairs when a grinder dies and you discover that approved vendors means approved to charge you triple. No footnote about the part where passive income from food service exists mostly in motivational speeches. He said he'd do minimal daily work because systems would handle the rest. I asked which systems. He waved a hand like he was dismissing a fly. In the spreadsheet, competition didn't exist or had the courtesy to be incompetent. In the world, the corner is crowded and the coffee is already hot. By the time he made the party his stage, I had said no a dozen ways. Each no became a synonym for cruelty. You're hoarding wealth, he told me, and I almost laughed because I've never felt less like a dragon than when I'm paying other people's heating bill. What finally caught in my throat that day wasn't the laptop hitting water. It was the generational script being read with such conviction. Art is play until it pays your mortgage, then it is obligation. So yes, I keep the numbers close to the plot. Because numbers, for my father, are the only language he bothers to translate. And because when I pressed the button at midnight, I wanted you to understand that it wasn't spite speaking. It was arithmetic. It was the difference between a boundary and a wish. It was a lifetime of being told my vocation was a toy, while the toy bankrolled a man's pride. It was the growing belief that if you let people rename your labor as luck and your loans as love, you wake up in a house you built for someone who calls it his. There's a particular choreography to public humiliation that people practice without knowing they're dancers. The host adjusts his smile. The chorus of relatives tunes itself to a neutral hum. The protagonist is invited to stand under the warm pool light of reasonableness, then asked to rearrange herself into compliance. The moment my father announced his guaranteed success, and my refusal crossed the invisible line he'd drawn, I saw the steps click into place. The pause for witnesses, the calculated volume, the moral geometry of a scene staged to corner me. When he reached for the laptop, it wasn't impulse. It was theater. The smirk was his curtain call. The sound the machine made hitting water was small and indecently ordinary. A soft note, a disappearance. No dramatic splash to honor 2 years of work. No cinematic underwater ballet of bubbles. Just a quick take and the bright rectangle became a darker idea, slipping down into a blue that pretended to be innocent. He said, "Oops," with the relish of a man who has finally found a lever that moves the world. My mother arrived with her line as if she had written it hours ago. It's just an accident. Maya. These things happen. The phrase is a solvent. It dissolves responsibility and leaves only the sticky residue of implication. If it's an accident, then your pain is melodrama. If it's an accident, then your boundary is rudeness. There were 15 relatives within range. I could map them by the tells. 2 ants studied the sky as if the forecast had become urgent. An uncle stirred ice with the concentration of a surgeon. A cousin checked a phone that hadn't buzzed. This is how the bystander effect wears a family's face. Everyone becomes a mirror that returns only your outline, never your details. The few who knew enough to be embarrassed looked the most bored. Boredom is safer than courage. It can be mistaken for maturity. I have replayed that minute enough times to know I made exactly the right number of moves. 0. I did not argue because he hadn't made an argument. He had made a demonstration. I did not appeal because there was no court. I did not inventory the hours per page, the layered files, the continuity maps that kept my 5 invented cultures from bleeding into one another. I did not mention that creative process is iterative and cumulative, that each decision lives on the next like a bridge. I did not say that even when you can redraw, the second drawing can never be the first. I let their theater end without applause. Then I sat down, sipped warm water, and became an archivist of the truth. If you've never taken a mental ledger in the middle of a party, it feels like stepping back from your own life until the scene fits a page. From the edge, the colors flatten and the numbers rise. Mortgage, $2,400 due in 5 days. Car insurance, $320. Internet and cable, $215. Phones, $160. Streaming, about $85. Quiet card I'd been paying down because panic is loud and I had been trying to keep their nights quiet, variable. And the old loan that had been renamed Love, $35,000. Around me, laughter resumed its shape. Chlorine and ketchup and sunscreen organized themselves back into a summer day. But the page had already been printed in my head, crisp as an invoice. I stayed for 1 hour on purpose. It wasn't martyrdom. It was a study. Every time my father laughed, I noted which relative laughed, too. Every time my mother said accident, I watched whose shoulders softened with relief at the word. It is a strange intimacy, cataloging the people who will sell your reality back to you at half price. I do not blame them all. Families teach obedience the way water teaches stones to smooth. But I recognized, sitting there, that the script I grew up with, respect your elders, don't embarrass the family, help without keeping score, had become a machine for converting my work into their comfort and my voice into silence. When I finally stood and folded my towel, it was dusk. The heat had loosened its jaw, the sky blew on its soup. I walked past the deep end and saw only sky in the water. That felt correct. A laptop is a tool. A sky is a story you tell yourself about what is possible. In the driveway, the laughter inside the house looked like a looping GIF, a perpetual motion machine that runs on denial and cake. I put my keys in the ignition and drove away without looking back. The drive home was the kind that leans on you. The radio said nothing useful, and I didn't ask it to. The city gathered itself into blue and chrome, Brake lights studied their own reflections in storefronts. In the quiet, there is always a committee at my back, the voices that once convinced me to be gentle, even when gentle meant invisible. Tonight they tried their old lines. "It's just a misunderstanding," they said. "Don't burn a bridge," they said. "Family is forever." I let them speak and then pictured my laptop hitting water, a small sound, a long sentence, and I answered with new language. Misunderstanding is the kindest word we give to cruelty when we're not ready to name it. Bridges don't burn when the other side dynamites your half. Family is not forever when forever requires you to disappear. At home, I locked the door and stood still until the apartment remembered I belonged to it. Then I opened my other laptop and breathed the clean relief of redundancy. Backups present and accounted for. Scripts intact. Thumbnails where I left them. Layered PSDs standing at attention. Color charts and continuity notes lined up like soldiers waiting for orders that would not involve drowning. Backup is a technical word. Tonight it felt like a moral one. Backup means I had respected my work more than my father did. Backup meant the vault he thought he'd smashed was a decoy. Backup turned my terror into arithmetic. Here's a truth I didn't know until that night. Rage is a kind of theater, too. It wants an audience. It wants to stomp and throw and demand applause in the form of apology. But apology is not a currency you can force someone to mint. Clarity is the quieter currency. It buys change. In the glow of the screen, clarity arranged my next hours like a storyboard. The scene headings wrote themselves: mortgage draft, insurance premium, internet cable, streaming, phones, servicer notice. A note, short and surgical. A clock, set for midnight. I thought about accident. The word is a trick door. It lets the guilty step through a wall without leaving a mark. Not every harm is planned, but some harms dress up as mishaps to avoid the effort of a reason. My father's hand around the laptop, the pause, the smirk, none of it qualified. For the insurance policy, the word accident provides. If he could have titled his scene, he would have called it discipline. In his story, I was a disobedient daughter whose refusal required correction. In my story, the correction had already begun, not against him, but for me. This is the part where people ask me if I did it for revenge. The word is a sparkler, bright, briefly satisfying, childish if you look too long. I don't think in revenge anymore. I think in boundaries and consequences. A boundary without consequence is a rumor you spread about yourself. A consequence without a boundary is chaos. For 2 years, my work had underwritten a life that mocked it. For 18 months, my deposits had kept a roof over people who called my vocation a toy. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a system. Systems don't end with speeches. They stop when the inputs change. So I wrote a list by hand because ink makes choices honest. I dated the page. I noted the scheduled mortgage draft in 5 days and circled it. I wrote the account numbers I knew by muscle memory, proof that care can become captivity if you're not careful. I rehearsed what I would say to representatives on overnight lines whose scripts would try to talk me back into the arrangement I had built. I am the one paying, I would say. I am removing my payment method. I printed a note to mail, 2 sentences that mirrored my mother's line to the millimeter. Oops. Looks like I accidentally canceled some things. These things happen. Petty? Perhaps. But precision has a taste when you've been force-fed euphemism. Before midnight, I walked my apartment like a stagehand checking ropes. I made tea I didn't drink. I sat at the window and watched the neighboring building's elevator light climb and drop, a dumb metronome. Somewhere in the city, my parents were watching a show that would buffer in 72 hours. Somewhere in a server farm, my files glowed like a promise. The clock on my stove blinked its way toward the hour. I have never loved a button before. That night, I did. At 11:59, I set my fingers on the keys and felt nothing theatrical at all, just the relief of cause-meeting effect. At 12 kide, I began. Midnight is a tidy hour. It closes one day with a click and opens another without fanfare. I liked the symmetry of it. My fingers hovered over the keys the way a conductor lifts a baton, not to summon drama, but to align timing with intent. The first task on my list were the heaviest number, so I led with it, the mortgage draft, $12,400 due in 5 days, the quiet engine that had been pulling their house uphill month after month. I logged into my bank with the muscle memory of a person who has practiced generosity more than sleep. Scheduled transfers. Recurring. The line glowed, neat as a confession. I clicked edit, then cancel, and the site asked if I was sure in 3 different ways, as if the website, too, had been raised by my mother. Am I sure? I was as sure as gravity. I confirmed. The screen chirped success in a cheerful green that felt indecently bright for an act that would dim an entire house. I took a screenshot, saved the confirmation PDF, and filed it in a folder I named by date, not by rage. Next, their car insurance, $320 monthly, another recurring draft that had grown from a one-time emergency into a tradition. Insurance, like love, is a promise you fund against catastrophe. Both curdle when they're only going one direction. The 24-hour line put me on hold to a melody that sounded like a loop of optimism. A representative came on with the midnight gentleness of someone who has learned not to take anger home. How can I help you tonight? I'm listed as the paying party on an auto policy for Kenneth and Janice Henderson, I said, giving the policy number, the last 4 of a social, the secret answers you only know when you have paid too many bills. I am removing my payment method and any responsibility for future premiums. Are you sure you want to? Yes. Please note this as immediate. Clicking keys. A pause. I've removed your card and marked that you're not financially responsible on this policy. They'll receive the next bill directly. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Not for the outcome, though that mattered, but for the fact that the sentence had a subject and a verb, and neither of them was me. I saved the time-stamped chat transcript and the email that arrived before we hung up. Streaming services were easy, depersonalized commerce renders, morality into toggles. I opened tabs like a magician pulling scarves from a sleeve. Netflix, Disney Plus, Prime, Max, Apple TV Plus, Paramount Plus. Every account sat under my email, every cancellation. 2 clicks deep behind a hesitant page that promised I would miss out on great stories. The line felt ironic enough to write down. I canceled them all. My inbox became a parade of, "We're sad to see you go," the corporate version of my mother's sigh. Internet and cable were more stubborn. The provider's site sent me to a chat, then the chat sent me to a number, and the number sent me to a different department, whose hold music sounded like it had been composed by a vending machine. When a man finally answered, he had the polite wariness of someone accustomed to customers treating him like an altar for their helplessness. "I am the account holder for service at address," I said. "I'm terminating the service in 72 hours. He launched the retention script. "We can upgrade your package at no extra—" "I'm not downgrading," I said gently. "I'm disconnecting." "May I ask the reason?" "Because the account holder no longer lives there." That was true enough. I hadn't lived there for years. I had only paid rent to a dwelling built from my deposits. He scheduled the disconnection, read me a confirmation code with the gravity of a spell, and warned me that reinstatement would require a new account, a credit check, a deposit, and the first month up front. I wrote it all down because consequences deserve the dignity of names. Phones came next, our family plan, a phrase that sounds cozy until you realize it can also mean the quietest leash. I asked the carrier to split their lines off into a new account under their names. The representative, young, kind, careful, asked if I wanted to keep paying until the cycle ended. "No," I said. "Start billing them now." There is a specific relief in the moment you stop pretending that convenience and captivity are synonyms. We changed the ownership. The screen repainted itself with fewer numbers under my view. I printed the new account details as if I were framing a document for a courthouse wall. The biggest task after the mortgage cancellation was subtler, notifying the mortgage servicer that I was not a co-borrower, had no legal obligation to cure a default, and should not be contacted as if I were a secret parent to the loan. When I reached the after-hours line, the voice on the other end was efficient, maybe in a different time zone. "I need you to add a note to the account," I said, reading the loan number twice. "I have been making payments for 18 months as a third party. I am ceasing. I am not a borrower or co-signer. Do not call me to request funds." "We can note that we are no longer to contact you," the voice said, almost grateful for the clarity. "But the borrowers will need to provide alternate payment within 5 business days," I finished. "I understand." The call ended. I placed the confirmation number in my file like a bead on a string. Between actions, I breathed. I wrote each completed step in ink on the list I had titled, simply, "Midnight." There is a temptation, when you are dismantling an arrangement that has masqueraded as love, to narrate it like a battle. It wasn't. It was a clean room procedure. Gown, gloves, one surface at a time. Do not touch your face. Do not touch your heart with contaminated hands. Sometime after 1 p.m., I opened the email drafts I'd prepared weeks earlier and had never had the courage to send. They were not explanations. They were closures to vendors, confirmations to myself. I attached PDFs where appropriate and blind copied my own archive. The folder looked like a lawyer had lived in my computer for years, waiting for his moment. There was one more task, the note. I printed it on a plain white sheet, centered like a prayer. Oops. Looks like I accidentally canceled some things. These things happen. You should plan better. I folded it once. It wasn't designed to persuade. It was built to mirror. Some people will say that was petty. Perhaps. But when a word has been used to gaslight you into accepting harm, placing the word back in its proper light is not pettiness, it is taxonomy. Call the specimen what it is so you do not mistake it again. By 2 and the procedural work was done, but I wasn't finished. I opened my cloud backups and ran one last verification pass, scripts, thumbnails, layered files, reference folders, contracts, invoices, all of it humming like a small city seen from a plane at night. I added 2-factor authentication to every account that mattered. I changed the password to the family streaming email, to a phrase only a person who had drawn 47 consistent characters would guess. Not because I expected sabotage, but because accident had taught me what people will do when they decide your boundaries are optional. The apartment was very quiet. The kind of quiet that occurs after the last audience member leaves and the stage crew stands staring at the set, deciding which piece to strike first. I made tea again, and this time I drank it. The heat felt like a vote of confidence from my own body, which had spent years bracing against phones that flashed my mother's name after midnight. At 3 a.m. I sat back and reviewed the night's log. Mortgage draft canceled. Car insurance payment method removed. Streaming services terminated. Internet cable scheduled for shutdown. Phones split into their own account. Mortgage servicer notified of my non-obligation. Documents saved and printed. A system built over years had been unwired in 3 hours because I finally believed my own story. I thought about my father's face as he let go of the laptop, how that tiny movement carried more truth than any speech he ever gave me about family. I thought about my mother's voice, gentle and treacherous, how she used it to wrap harm in tissue paper so it would look like a mistake. I thought about the word accident, how soft it sounded in their mouths, how sharp it felt in my bones. And I thought about a different word, consequence. Consequence is not a weapon, it is a mirror. You hold it up, and people meet themselves. Before I turned off the lamp, I addressed the envelope with the note and set it by the door. In the morning, I would mail it. The thought should have pleased me. It didn't. What I felt was simpler, closer to clean. The apartment smelled faintly of paper and tea and the ozone of an overworked router. The city outside kept its own hours. Somewhere across town, my parents slept inside a house I had been lifting with my back. In 5 days, an automatic hand would reach into an account that would not be padded by me. It would find what it found. A letter would arrive. A term would be renamed. At 3:07 a.m., I closed my laptop. Midnight had ended, and so had the job I had never applied for. The first tremor arrived 48 hours after midnight, small enough that if you were inside the house, you could pretend it was the refrigerator settling. The internet stopped speaking. One minute my parents were streaming a detective who solves everything in 42 minutes with a quip and a drink, and the next the progress wheel began to circle like a thought that wouldn't land. My cousin later told me Janice tapped her phone, then the router, then Kenneth. The provider's message was succinct in a way that good truths are. Service has been disconnected by the account holder. To restore, open a new account. Deposit, credit check, first month up front. That's the part retention scripts never say out loud. Comfort has an entrance fee when someone else's card has been carrying your key. That evening, the first "Are you available?" text lit my phone. I watched it bloom on the locked screen and die there. The number was familiar, the tone more so, inquiry disguised as civility, a soft front for a hard ask. I didn't open it. Boundaries are partly technology. They're also a practice of not explaining. By morning there were 7 more messages, each a slightly louder version of the last. At noon, a voice call, then 5 in a row, as if repetition could reshelve cause and effect. By the 3rd day, the streaming services had all gone quiet. Netflix offered a sign-in that required a card. Max looked betrayed. Disney tried cheer. "We're sad to see you go," they chorused into my inbox. The line made me smile when nothing else did. I kept the emails because documentation is how you resist the undertow of revisionist history. The phones flipped next. My mother called my work line, the one I keep for client calls and schools that spell my name wrong on placards. "Maya, sweetheart," she said to the voicemail, dragging the endearment through a minefield. Something is wrong with our phones. Is there a problem with the company? Your father can't make calls. Can you? She trailed off, then found the word she always uses when she needs me to erase a consequence she helped create. Help. I didn't return the call. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because suffering isn't what this was. This was a ledger turning back into a ledger after years of being dressed as love. If the line sounds cold, that's because warmth had been weaponized in my house for a long time. The trick of enabling is that it names itself compassion and then makes you ashamed if you stop. Day 5 was the earthquake. The mortgage draft reached for an account that wasn't padded and found air. Default notices don't speak in italics. They speak in uppercase and countdowns. Pay within 5 business days to avoid fees and penalties. A longer clock began ticking behind the first. Miss again, and the next letter carries a word the house can feel. Foreclosure. Somewhere in town. A printer word. Somewhere in my parents' kitchen, an envelope's glue gave way. My phone lit up like a siren. 37 missed calls from Kenneth's number by morning, 42 from Janice's, 63 texts I never opened. The previews told a story that could have won an award for predictable plot, confusion, accusation, rage, bargaining. The one that made me set the phone down and breathe was a single word, all caps, please. I did not answer. I couldn't. I would have been answering the previous decade, and I had run out of lines that did anything but extend the scene. When I finally broke silence, it was measured, not an accident. I wrote, and hit send to the new number Janice had tried from. You destroyed my work on purpose and called it accidental. Now you're meeting consequences that are equally deliberate. Enjoy discovering the difference. Then I blocked that number, too, and sat with the throb in my wrist where the vein always rises when I type something final. What followed could be plotted like an aftershock map. The credit card I had been paying, the one even I hated, froze after a missed cycle. You discover quickly, when a card stops, how many parts of a life were tripping through on plastic. Gas, groceries, the hardware store where my father buys things that promise usefulness. The car insurance went into grace period and then into suspension. Driving without insurance turns every errand into a dare. I am told Kenneth drove anyway, righteousness strapped in like a passenger. The family meeting was inevitable. It arrived in my inbox as a group text from a cousin who has made a career out of hosting other people's disputes. "We all need to talk," she wrote, as if talk were a surgical tool rather than a way to move pain to the end of the sentence. I declined with a sentence that fit on one line. I will not attend a meeting designed to root my money back into a system that destroyed my work and called it an accident. She sent a thumbs-up emoji that felt like a prayer. They met without me. Later she called, careful with each word like it might break. "Your dad said you're destroying the family over a laptop," she began. "He says it was a mistake and you're overreacting." I said nothing, and she filled the space. "But also," she continued, "2 people who were at the pool said he did it on purpose. They said he smirked." I didn't know what to say to Aunt Janice when she said the word accident. It felt wrong in my mouth. Social psychology has tidy charts for this sort of thing. Groupthink, moral licensing, diffusion of responsibility. Families write their own versions with embroidery and casseroles. There are roles: the martyr who calls herself the glue, the visionary who is allergic to realism, the peacemaker who confuses quiet with peace. In that meeting, I'm told, the roles did exactly what they always do. Some relatives nodded along to the overreacting story because it spared them from revising their sense of who the adults are. Others, newly embarrassed by what they had watched poolside, said aloud what had been true, that a man had punished a refusal with destruction and a woman had called it accidental because the truth would have required a cost she didn't want to pay. A week from midnight, my voicemail contained a new shape. "Maya," Janice said from a number I hadn't blocked yet, "we could lose the house because of your reaction to an unfortunate accident. Please call so we can resolve this." I listened twice, not because I was tempted, but because it was a museum-quality exhibit of the craft. Passive voice, no subject doing harm, a house held up as hostage to shame. I sent the text I had prepared for that exact moment, the one a friend had read and approved like a will. Not an accident. Consequences. Then I blocked the number and went back to my pages, where people tell each other the truth because fiction lets you be braver than your life. By the second week, the systems I had unwired had found their equilibrium in absence. The house was quieter. No premium channels murmuring in the background, no algorithm ushering them gently from story to story. The cell phones worked again, but on a plan that sent the bill where it belonged. the car with the higher payment went up for sale. A cousin loaned them enough to cure the mortgage's first default in exchange for promises of as soon as we can. If I say that lines like that make my teeth ache, it's not from judgment, it's from recognition. I heard rumors, the way news moves through a family like a draft under a door. Kenneth had been on job boards. He said words like team player and reliable transportation to forms that did not care who he used to be in rooms where he controlled the volume. Janice had applied for a higher-paying admin role in a different office across town where nobody calls her to ask if Maya will be helping out. They cut dinners out. They cut a trip. They cut a subscription box my mother used to call a treat, though the treats were mostly for her future self, the one who would have a life she didn't need help paying for. Future selves are expensive. They're also tender. I tried not to think about hers. Some nights, alone at my desk, I wondered whether I had become the villain of a family legend. In another version of this story, I am the daughter who pulled the plug while her parents were going through a hard time. That story will play well in certain living rooms. It follows a familiar beat, and stories with familiar beats are soothing. I did not argue with that imaginary audience. I drew a spread of a character crossing a ruined bridge, her face still, the sky unhelpful. She doesn't rebuild it. She goes around. When I finished the page, I felt taller in my chair. By the third week, the quiet had grown contours. My phone had stopped lighting like a siren. My inbox learned my new rules and became again a place for contracts and small joys. The provider's disconnection date came and went. Somewhere, a new account had not yet been opened. You can live without broadband. You can't live with a story that tells you your child exists to keep your lights on. I don't know if they realized that yet. Realizations come like weather, not when you want them, always when you need them. On a Wednesday afternoon, while flattening a complicated panel where the light source wanted to be in 3 places at once, I looked up and understood the simplest thing I'd been trying not to say. I had not destroyed anything. I had stopped pretending I was a utility. And the difference between those sentences was the difference between drowning and coming up for air. 1 month from midnight, the house I had been lifting with my back learned the shape of its own weight. Kenneth and Janice were still in it, but the ecosystem had changed. The big car with the higher payment sat in the driveway with a handwritten "for sale" sign that made the hood look embarrassed. A cousin floated them enough to cure the missed mortgage payment in exchange for a promise that, as soon as we can, would arrive before anybody asked twice. They canceled the premium channels and kept a basic internet plan that stuttered when the weather had opinions. The coffee kiosk dream shrank to a set of PDFs in a folder labeled Opportunities, which is to say, Mausoleum. I heard these details the way weather travels, through cousins and aunts and the long arm of social media that can make any kitchen feel adjacent. I didn't look for the news, but proximity is a porous thing. Kenneth, who once recited the catechism of passive income like a man selling salvation, was on job boards at the kitchen table, toggling filters for full-time, benefits, no heavy lifting. He wanted something stable now, a phrase he used to mock. when I said it out loud about contracts and timelines. The vocabulary of reality has a way of insisting itself after fantasy runs its course. He dusted off language he hadn't used since I was small, punctual, detail-oriented, team player. He practiced "sir" on men he used to dismiss as small thinkers. He ironed a shirt with that faintly scorched smell of long disuse. When the shirt cooled, he ironed it again. Janice, who has always been good at every job on the planet except naming harm, updated a resume that had once been a list of past tense verbs and now tried out words like implemented and streamlined and reduced costs by. She applied to a higher-paying admin role across town, a place where nobody opened a phone call by asking if Maya would be helping out this month. For years, she had built her competence into a net that caught my father's dreams as they fell through their own holes. Now she was trying to weave the net for herself. Ambition looks different when it isn't a guardrail for a man's car. Their life got smaller in the ways that feel loud when you've been living on subsidy and denial. No dinners out to keep the marriage a priority. No subscription boxes that addressed my mother by a nickname she never had growing up. No vacation to reset from a year that had looked the same as the last one. I do not tell you these losses to gloat. I would be lying if I said there wasn't a sliver of satisfaction in watching arithmetic take its rightful seat at the table, but the prevailing feeling was simpler: gravity, discovered anew. You can rage at it, but gravity does not apologize. It just is. Meanwhile, I worked. Relief is not the absence of weight. It is the presence of muscle where you need it. Sichum. With the chorus of incoming demands silenced, my studio felt bigger, like a room that had been crowded with coats that were not mine and had finally been emptied. I woke without the tiny flinch I used to feel checking my phone. The flinch that mouths please, let it not be them before the screen lights. On a gray morning with snow pretending to be serious, I delivered Volume 1 of the Meridian Cycle early, weeks ahead of the date that had been red-circled on my editor's wall. The email I wrote was simple, the kind you could hang a calendar on. Attached, I said, "Thank you for trusting me with time." The reviews came like careful footsteps at first. A starred notice that made me pour coffee too quickly and spill it on a stack of reference prints. Another review that used the word architectural about pacing in a way that made me feel seen by a stranger who had built their own things. Pre-orders climbed in a curve that eased some of my private math, health insurance, studio rent, a small cushion that didn't have to double as someone else's emergency fund. A podcast host who had once treated me like the surprise panelist messaged to book me for an episode about the future of visual narrative, the kind of phrase that used to make me cynical and now, somehow, only made me tired in a pleasant way. The Eisner nomination arrived with the same odd hush it had the first time. A click, a list, my name embedded inside a moment that would look inevitable later. I took a walk in a thin coat and let the wind have my hair. The city mispronounced congratulations at me in car horns and buses and boots on salt. When the adaptation conversation started, I knew enough to breathe first and sign later. A producer friend with a good jaw for risk called to say, "They're interested in more than the title. they're interested in your spine. He meant the through line. He also meant my capacity to say no where the contract needed it. We moved quietly. I hired a lawyer who likes clauses the way I like white space. When the rights sold, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at a number that would have once felt like medicine for every wound. It didn't feel like medicine now. It felt like a tool I would use carefully, or else it would start telling me what to build. Cousins reported that the family meeting circuit had cooled. At first, there had been talk about hard times and misunderstandings and my overreaction. The script played well until witnesses began telling the unadorned truth in rooms that still smelled faintly of chlorine, that a man had picked up his daughter's livelihood, that he had smirked, that he had said accident the way a boy says dare you to contradict me. Stories prefer tidy morals, but facts won't stay dressed when water gets involved. The embarrassment that followed didn't heal anything. But embarrassment is a bridge to accountability more often than pride is. I didn't attend Thanksgiving that year. I drew a 5-page sequence of a desert market at dusk instead, the air braided with dust and barter and a woman's voice. Friends came over with leftovers in containers that looked like small, edible moons. We ate on the floor and talked about nothing that required me to be anyone's alibi. I texted my cousin to ask if she needed help with the dishes, and she sent a picture of a collapsed pie with the caption, "This is what happens when we talk about real things." It looked like relief. 6 months from midnight, the book had been out long enough to find its people. I watched them online the way you watch birds, alert, delighted, wary of scaring them off. They posted panels that had cost me 12 hours per page and called them effortless. I laughed in my kitchen, a sound the kettle echoed because it was learning me again. Schools wrote to ask if I would talk to kids about careers in art, a phrase that would have made my father snort 2 years earlier. I said yes as often as I could because somebody else's father had probably already snorted in front of them, and I wanted to put a louder story in their ear. News about my parents arrived less often. Kenneth took a job with a title that sounded like a compromise between dignity and fact. He wore a name tag for the first time since before I was born and found that it didn't bite. He learned that showing up every day is the kind of success that leaves a quieter bruise. I heard that he stopped saying guaranteed about anything but sunrise and taxes. Janice moved to the higher-paying admin job and discovered that people in a different building admired her competence without requiring that she launder reality to give it to them. She started packing lunches that looked like a person who had decided taste mattered to her again. On the anniversary of the pool, I drove by the old street and kept going. Drive-bys are theater. You can't redo a scene by staring at it set. I parked by the river and sketched a spread that had been skittish in my head for months. A bridge in ruin, a character on one bank, an entire life on the other. In the drawing, she didn't rebuild. She took a different path, the kind you only find when you stop calling boundary betrayal. I inked slower than usual, careful not to perform forgiveness I didn't feel. Forgiveness gets used like a crowbar in families, something to pry you back into position. Mine would be quieter, and it would be mine. A year from midnight, I spoke at a festival in a city where the wind is an insult and the bookstores are cathedrals. After my panel, a woman my mother's age waited at the side and pressed a folded note into my hand. For later, she said, a kindness in the way she didn't ask for a picture. The note, read in a hotel room that smelled like nobody, said, "My daughter writes." I didn't know how to love her work without owning it. Thank you for teaching me a different verb. I kept that note in the same drawer as my first review. They learned to talk to each other at night. 2 years from midnight, my life had the shape of a choice that had been honored. Volume 2 had joined Volume 1 on shelves where teenagers take pictures beside them like pilgrimages. The adaptation deal had become a writer's room that asked me questions I enjoyed answering and more I enjoyed refusing. I had learned the practical religion of saying no and the strange quiet that follows when no is no longer an apology. My money went to things that behaved like tools and people who behaved like people. Sometimes I sent some to places where kids needed paper and pencils more than speeches. Some mornings I woke stupidly early and sketched for no one. As for my parents, the last I heard, the mortgage was current, the cable basic, the phones paid on time. They had learned to live inside numbers that matched their incomes. The story they tell about me depends on the room, I'm sure. Sometimes I am the ungrateful child who left them in a storm with only a bucket. Sometimes I am the cautionary tale that keeps a hand from curling around a laptop. It is not my job to edit their scripts. I wrote mine. It is legible to the people I need it to be legible to, including the stranger in the mirror who now looks back at me the way you look at a colleague whose work you respect. If this sounds neat, it isn't. There are days I still compose emails I will never send. Nights the word accident floats up from the dark like a bubble and pops against the ceiling. Mornings I see a laptop in a pool when I open my eyes. But mostly there is work, and in the work a steadying. Mostly there is a room that smells like paper and tea, and the faint electricity of a life that runs on its proper grid. Mostly there is this, a boundary with teeth, and the knowledge that when I pressed the button, I didn't end love. I ended a system that had been eating it. 2 years is long enough for a story to stop being a wound and become a scar you can trace without flinching. When I look back now, I don't see a laptop falling into blue as much as I see the meaning that followed it down. Accident was the costume, consequence the person wearing it. Families have a way of rehearsing a line until it sounds like truth. I had been reciting their lines for so long that I mistook volume for credibility. What midnight taught me is that boundaries are not an act of war. They are the conditions under which peace can exist. You don't love people less when you stop funding their denial. You love them differently at a distance where they might learn to meet themselves. If this story has a thesis, it's this. Enabling is not kindness. It's counterfeit tenderness that buys calm today with interest due tomorrow. And interest, as anyone who has paid it knows, is the cruelest math in the room. I sometimes imagine a different version of that afternoon by the pool. In it, my father looks at the laptop, then at me, and sighs without theatrics. He says, "Okay." I hear you. I will not ask again. My mother places a hand on his wrist and says nothing that makes me smaller. A cousin shifts her weight and says out loud what everyone knows. The scene closes without a splash. In that version, there is no midnight. There is a dinner where we clear plates together and I go home early to work. Love is not tested and therefore does not have to prove it is real. But we do not live in that version. We live in this one, where the test came and I passed by, refusing to rewrite the question. If you are watching this and you see your reflection in the glass, if you are the one who pays the quiet bills and swallows the louder stories, if your profession is a punchline until it becomes a pipeline, if your competence has been drafted into a cause you never chose, then hear me clearly. You are allowed to call harm by its correct name. You are allowed to change the inputs to a system that eats you. You are allowed to divide love from logistics and insist that both be respected or neither will survive. There will be people who tell you that ending an arrangement ends affection. That is convenient for them and untrue for you. Affection thrives on clarity. It dies of ambiguity dressed as devotion. I won't pretend there's no cost. When you reorganize the economy of a family, the first currency that crashes is approval. For a while, you will be the villain in a myth someone needs to survive their own choices. You will be accused of overreacting, of hoarding, of burning bridges that were only drawbridges lowered when you arrived with money. But here is the ordinary miracle that followed my midnight. The people who were capable of truth found it. They spoke about what they had actually seen, not what they had been taught to say. Embarrassment did its quiet work, building a bridge that pride would never have managed. And eventually, the story diversified. In some living rooms, I am still the cautionary tale. In others, I am the map you make when you are done being lost. Professionally, the arc looks clean now. Deliver the book early. See the starred reviews. Sell the rights. Stand on stages where the mic smells faintly of nerves and dust. But the part that matters most to me is less photogenic. It is the mornings when my phone does not vibrate with crisis, when my studio feels like a room for making instead of a command center for triage. It is the afternoons I spend with teenagers who draw worlds and need to hear that career in art is not a contradiction in terms. It is the nights I close my laptop and don't see it sinking. Success is lovely. Sanity is priceless. As for my parents, I do not itemize their days anymore. That ledger is not mine to keep. I know they live inside numbers that reflect their incomes. I know the word guaranteed has been retired from my father's mouth, and that my mother has found a workplace where telling the truth does not feel like betrayal. I know, too, that we are not close. Politeness has replaced proximity. On holidays, we exchange messages that behave like bridges. Narrow, necessary, safe. If this feels colder than the redemption arc you were hoping for, I understand. We love neat endings because they ask so little of us afterward. My ending is serviceable instead of cinematic. It lets me work. It lets me sleep. Sometimes I still hear the word accident echo up from the dark. A bubble rising from the past to pop against my ceiling. When it does, I name it out loud and watch it go flat, the way you deflate a story by refusing to be its audience. Language matters. It can be a tool or a trap. The day I stopped letting other people define my terms was the day my life became legible to me. Consequence. Boundary. Work. Rest. Love. Each word now means what it says. Thank you for staying with me through this. Stories like mine run the risk of sounding like victory laps, when really they are field notes from a life that had to be re-engineered. I am grateful you listened, not because I needed witnesses. God knows I've had enough reluctant ones, but because maybe, somewhere in the middle of my details, you found the courage to change one of yours. If you did, I hope you'll tell me. I hope you'll tell each other. The comment sections on videos like this are sometimes the only places where people get to practice saying the hard parts out loud. Your story might be the sentence someone else needs to speak their first truth. I wish you good health, all the boring, glorious hours when your body does its job so quietly you forget to thank it. I wish you family happiness, and if that cannot be found, then I wish you the wisdom to build a family out of people who treat your boundaries like the doorways into knowing you, not as walls that keep them from using you. I wish you work that respects you back, and rest you don't have to earn with exhaustion. And I wish you the relief of calling accidents what they are, and consequences what they must be. If this story resonated with you, if any part of it felt like someone speaking a language you thought you invented to survive, consider subscribing. It helps this channel find the people who are still whispering in rooms that reward silence. Share your experience below. Have you been asked to fund a narrative that erased you? Did you press your own midnight button? What happened next? Your words may be the bridge someone else needs. I'll be reading, and I'll be rooting for you, not because I have answers, but because I know how much it matters to have company while you look for them. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. May your days be ordinary in the best ways, and your nights be your own. May the stories you tell about yourself be true and kind. And may the next button you press open a future that deserves you.